Symone Sanders. I am very excited to be here today. We're going to have a very fruitful conversation, and yes, we're going to take crowd questions. So before I set up this panel, I want to tell you who the panelists are. Is that okay? Oh, I like a room that talks back. Is that okay? All right, as long as nobody tells me to shut up, we're good. So first up on the panel, we have Ms. Ilyse Hogue. She is the president of NARAL. Please give her a warm round of applause as she comes to the stage. Following Ilyse, we have Senator Mike McGuire of California, State Senator Mike McGuire. They're going to keep coming, keep clapping. Next, we have Assemblywoman Nily Rozic from New York. And last but certainly not least, we have Karine Jean-Pierre, who is a senior advisor for MoveOn.org. So you all see the program. It says we're going to talk about states resisting Trump and the conservative federal agenda. That's not what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about how we move, just as Nick said in his opening remarks, how we move past resistance to action. So as my panelists get seated, one of the first questions I would like folks to ask is they tell us a little bit more about themselves with 2 minutes, because I do have a timer up here and we're going to use it. One, what does resistance mean to you? And two, is the resistance effective? Because some would argue that it's not necessarily the job of state legislators, for example, to be resisting. I need y'all to be working. So is the resistance effective, and what does the resistance mean to you? And also tell us a little bit about yourself. And we're going to start with the illustrious president of NARAL.
So I'm Ilyse Hogue. I have been the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America for coming up on 5 years. You can't hear me?
Can we turn the mics up, please?
How's that? Oh, way better, yeah. I've been the president of NARAL for coming up on 5 years. I tell people I did not come from reproductive rights. I came to reproductive rights from a long history in progressive politics, and I did it for one simple reason, and it was that I came to realize that all of those things that Nick talked about, all of the promise for women and families in this country was not possible unless we focused on women's sovereignty, about being able to make their own choices in our lives that determine the rest of our lives. And it's been a transformative experience. I mean, we were, I'm from Texas, I'm a 4th generation Texan. We've been living in the resistance for a long time, right? Is my Texas delegation out there somewhere? There you go, yeah. I mean, there are states, and many of y'all in this room, that actually know what it's like to live in resistance long before Donald Trump became president.
Oh no.
Lost it again, there we go. Long before Donald Trump became president. And through the eyes of women and families, through the eyes of women and families who don't have means, who are struggling economically, that resistance has been powerful, because women do what it takes to take care of our families, right? Even in the harshest of circumstances. So out of the resistance is actually born the promise. And when women get ahead and when women succeed, it's not just the individual that does, it's our families, it's our communities, and it's our entire country. So that's what drew me to the work. But I will say one more thing, which is that I woke up at 3:30 this morning in Worcester, Massachusetts, to drive to an airport to get on a plane to be here by 9 a.m., which I'm thrilled, because I love 6 and I love y'all and I love the work that you're doing. But the reason I was up there is because I had the honor and the privilege to attend a wedding yesterday of 2 of my very, very, very close friends, Jacob and Steve. That we can celebrate the love of 2 men through legal marriage in this country is an astonishing thing that we should never take for granted. And it is an astonishing thing that was made possible by so many of you all and your counterparts in this room who made that change, made that dignity, made that recognition happen at the state level long before it happened at the federal level. And that is the promise. That is the promise of dignity, justice, economic security that comes out of the resistance, when we recognize the resistance as the engine of the car that's driving us forward. So thank you very much.
All right. State Senator McGuire, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe what you've been working on this morning, and what does the resistance mean to you, 1, and 2, do you think it's effective?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ms. Sanders. It's so good to see you, and good morning, everyone. How you doing? I hope you are all fired up to be here. I know I am excited to be with you. Just want to let you know, I may have to leave a little early. I represent a large district in California from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. And since 10 p.m. Pacific time last night, we've had 10 major fires, thousands of homes lost, and tens of thousands evacuated. So I have to be on a flight early. But I'd like to be able to talk about the resistance. And candidly, I know that I'm from California. And there are some in this country, including my uncle, who I love, and he lives in Idaho. And he thinks that everyone in California are communists. But it's less about the resistance, I think, that what we're doing in California. But what some may call the resistance to us, it's keeping on what the majority of Americans believe in. And some examples, right? So, number one, as progressives, we have to focus on job growth and making sure that we are hiring at a living wage. And that's what we've done in California. We're now number one in the entire nation in job growth because we've focused on our economy. When you take a look at climate change, the vast majority of Americans believe that climate change will impact their quality of life in their lifetime. California just moved the strongest climate bill in America. We should be doing the same in every state. That's what the resistance is all about. The resistance is about infrastructure. When President Trump talks about this BS $1 trillion infrastructure plan that he wants to invest on tax credits, it will never happen. It's never happened in our history, and it won't happen in our future. If we are serious about investing in a strong middle class in America, then we have to rebuild our roads, our bridges, and our highways. In California, we just passed a $50 billion infrastructure plan. Republican or Democrat, you want good infrastructure, am I right?
Yeah.
When we talk about the resistance is paying women equal to men, and it's about damn time. And you ask Republican women and you ask Democratic women, it's not about party, it's about making sure that we have equal pay across this nation. And it's also ridiculous that we continue to talk like that, right? Because it's 2017. Healthcare. You take a look at the most rural parts of the state of California. They're the poorest areas of our state. They are the most vulnerable when it comes to repeal and replace. When it comes to the resistance, it's all of us in this room standing up to those dangerous policies and making sure that we don't let the ACA be rolled back. By the way, we are at 17% uninsured in California in 2012 prior to the ACA. We are now at a record low 7% uninsured. It is because of the ACA, and we have to bring that conversation to a universal health care system here in the United States of America. And then finally, Ms. Sanders is going to throw a fork at me in just a second. But it's also about transparency. And that's why we are working with Republicans and Democrats alike to get Senate Bill 149 passed in California. And that would mandate that every Democrat and every Republican presidential candidate has to release 5 years of their tax returns because 74% of Americans believe President Trump should release his tax returns. This is about common sense and doing the greatest good for the most amount of people here in America, and it is time to take our state legislatures back. Thanks for having me.
All right. Assemblywoman, you have the floor.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank Six for having all of us, and I want to give a shout out to my New York colleagues who are here, both Christine and Gustavo, right in the middle. Shout out to the New York delegation holding it down. So I'm Nily Rozic. I'm from Flushing, Queens. I'm a Mets fan. Don't hold that against me. But I am also a first-generation American who came to Flushing at a very young age and really got involved in the local community because I didn't want to just be a cog in the system. I wanted to get involved. In 2012, almost 5 years ago, when I got elected, I was the youngest woman ever elected to the state legislature in New York. And since then, we've done incredible work in getting more women and women of color specifically elected to the state legislature because that is ultimately how we are going to create change from the grassroots up. Resistance to me is all about not just focusing on the White House, it's all about our state house. And if we're going to have an impact in 2020, we need to start today. Actually, we should have started yesterday, but that's why we're all here, right? And it means that we are going to work together on everything that impacts people day to day. That's the minimum wage, voter ID laws, gun violence control, collective bargaining agreements. That all happens at the state level, and that's why we are so excited in New York to be at the forefront of fighting on all of these issues together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Oh, do I have the floor? I just want to make sure.
You have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Symone. Hey, everybody. My name is Karine Jean-Pierre. I started off my career in New York. I'm from New York, grew up in Queens Village, and I started off my 15-year political career in the city council, and then I moved out to D.C. and did national politics, worked for on issue-based campaigns, and then ended up in the Obama administration, where I met Nick, who I thank him so much for putting all of this together. Nick is a great guy. I've known him for 10 years, and so we worked in the campaign and in the administration. So, and then I ended up at MoveOn.org after the 2016 election, and so just been part of working with our allies like NARAL and all of you in the States and really trying to push forward the resistance. For me, what does the resistance mean to me? As a mom, it means I look at my 3-year-old every day and I think about, okay, what is this country going to look like for her? And when she's 10 years old and she looks back and she's like, Mommy, what did you do when Donald Trump was doing all this awful things? As she's going to learn about this president, she's going to learn about what happened, and I want to be able to tell her that I fought. I fought fearlessly for her, that I stood up, and that anytime I had a platform, I used it. So I think about my child a lot when I think about the resistance. I also think about myself. I'm an immigrant. I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and so I think about all of those things that this administration attacks on a constant, daily, every freaking second they do that. We have someone who sits in the Oval Office behind the Resolute desk signing things constantly to attack everything that I am. So it is important to me to continue to fight, and I'm part of an organization that gives me the opportunity to do that. So is the resistance working? I believe that it is. Look at, we stopped the repeal of ACA, which I think is incredibly important to have done. And I also think about all of you out there. You guys are part of the resistance. I think about the 8 seats that we were able to flip, those state legislator seats that we were able to flip from red to blue. There's been, 27 special elections this year in red districts, and winning 8 is not bad, it's 30%. And anytime there is a competitive Democrat in these races, we've won them. So I think all of you are playing such an important role in what we're doing, because it's not about just DC, it's not about what's happening in 1600 Pennsylvania and also the Hill, it's what's happening in these states. And that's how we're gonna stop a lot of these awful bad bills that are coming out from these state legislators that are heavily controlled by Republicans. So I thank you for being part of the resistance. I thank you for being here. And let's continue to fight.
There we go. So, since the election, since November, basically, there has been this really intense increased focus on state legislative races, on what is just happening in the states in general with a number of bills. And I would like you all to speak to what effective national and state partnerships look like. Because you've got groups like NARAL and MoveOn, who you all, both of your organizations have done lots of work as of late in the states, mobilizing. But what does it look like? What does an effective partnership really look like from you all's perspective, and then from my state legislators' perspective? What are some things that maybe folks should know when engaging in national partnerships, if you will, on the ground issues? Because it seems sexy and great to have a national group, come in and do work with your do work on a bill or something that's happening, but it could get a little sticky. You want to pop in first, Ilyse? I'm looking at you.
Well, I know that there are enough of you in the audience that we do work with that will hold me accountable if I actually misspeak on this. NARAL's an old organization. We're going to be 50 years old in 2019. We have members on the ground in every state. We have brick and mortar and staff on the ground from those states in the states in 23, about to be 24 states. So, when we try to actually be really clear about what we have to offer when engaging in state partnerships. But I want to back up for a second, because I think we need to think, I hear all the time, like, do you do state work or do you do federal work? And the answer for us is, of course, that we do both. But I think there's a third category that gets passed over too frequently, and that's national work, which is that the sum of the states should add up to more than their parts, right? Y'all are doing incredibly important work that promotes the values of progressives and progressive Democrats, and that needs to be put together with your help. So when we think about what state work we engage in, we ask 3 questions with our partners in the states. Does it have substantive impact? Does it actually matter to women and families in those states? Does it lift up new leaders? Because very much like Nick spoke, we believe that new leadership is coming from and needs to come from the states, right? And I'm seeing some of my favorite people right out there. And then the third is, does it change a national conversation? And this for us is really, really important, and it means 2 things. Does it actually put the opposition on record, right? And does it actually allow us to frame things in our own values rather than reacting to the opposition's values? So my friend here on my right, we've been working with California state legislature for some time on a bill that is now on the governor's desk. It's called the Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Act. It is not well known that women can not only be fired for their reproductive health choices in terms of choosing contraception or choosing abortion, but also this bill was catalyzed because a young woman was fired for being pregnant out of wedlock. I didn't even know we use that term anymore until this happened. And so we've been working with California on this. Well, we also are not only working with California, we worked with our good friends at the municipal level in St. Louis, one of the reddest red states, right? And we passed a municipal ordinance with the help of our amazing local folks, but particularly our state leader, Allison Dreith, who is a powerhouse from St. Louis. And the governor of Missouri, deep red state, remember, got so bent out of shape that he called the state legislature back into session. I'm watching Stacey Newman and Cora Faith Walker, who are 2 of my favorite leaders in the states, nod their heads, to have a special, his words, pro-life session, right, to overturn the St. Louis ordinance. Well, this turned out to be a pretty difficult thing for him to do. The national headlines were like, the Missouri governor wants you to be able to be fired for your birth control, right? All of a sudden, and we'd already done this in DC, so between DC, St. Louis, and our wonderful friends in the Missouri State Legislature who were prepared to go on offense in a red state, our great friends in California, we're having a really different national conversation that gets at what we always say, which is this is not and has never been about abortion. If it was, the other side would join hands with us and fight for access to contraception and the kinds of policies that support working moms and families in this country, but they don't do that, right? So we've got a red state governor on defense. We've got a blue state that is actually leading the way in talking about our values. And we're changing the national conversation while having substantive impact for women and families around the country, enacting protections at a time where the federal government certainly seems hell-bent on removing protections.
So for you, when you talk about going beyond resistance and doing state work, it's not necessarily federal versus state. For you, it's specifically about a national conversation. Is this the same thing over here at Move On when we talk? Because I mean, you all are in the states.
Yeah.
Y'all are on the front lines of the resistance.
Right.
So what does that look like for you?
So Move On, we are one of, just to give a little bit about background on Move On, and I'll answer the question. So we are one of the largest independent progressive organizations. We have about 8 million members all across the country, and we don't necessarily have chapters or people, like staff kind of offices based in different regions or states, but what we do is we try to empower our members. We train our members, we empower them, we really make sure they have the information that they need to fight whatever is happening in their state, or even nationally. When it came to repealing ACA, we made sure that they had the phone numbers, we made sure that they went to the town halls that were located in their states. So it's really kind of elevating the conversation and empowering our members, and also we help our allies. That's one of the ways that this resistance, I believe, is working, is helping NARAL, helping other national organizations who have local chapters and feeding into them, like helping all of the organizations that's working on DACA, for example, and making sure that we tap into our members to push what it is that our allies are trying to do. So all of this is important. One thing that we did this summer is we had something called Resistance Summer, where we had about more than 1,000 of our members across the country, and we had these conversations in neighborhoods about what are the important issues. And we wanted to start this now as we're going into 2018 and really training people in the states and giving them, like I said, the tools and mobilizing them and having the conversation and figure out what is the issues that that people care about most in their neighborhood. And what we're thinking was, we call them Move On mobilizers, it is a way to really get folks embedded into their communities as we go into 2018. So that's what it looks like to us, but having that ally relationship and helping the different issues that different folks are working on, pushing that forward, tapping into our millions of membership, and also raising money too. It's a way to raise money for folks. We partnered up, a perfect example is we partnered up with the Hispanic Federation with Lin-Manuel, and Move On members raised more than $3 million. And we sent an email, we really mobilized that community, and that was for Puerto Rico. And so those are the ways that we try to really kind of tap into what we do and what the tools and the folks that we have, the power that we have.
So for my state legislators, the resistance is about y'all going to work.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how have you been able to leverage some of these national partnerships? What does that look like in terms of the resistance in your offices? And if you could give 2 best practices, what would they be?
So look, I think we all know coalitions matter, right? We can't do half of the work that we do without a strong coalition behind us. To give you an example, a lot of the criminal justice work that we do in New York is driven and done in partnership with amazing organizations. When at the federal government, at the federal level, they are trying to roll back the ACA and get rid of family planning services, a coalition of reproductive health organizations got together in New York and said, we should do a bill inserting family planning services into the state budget if we can't get that done at the federal level. But what I think as a state legislator is really nice in this new world post-November, we're no longer thought of as the minor leagues. We are now the major leagues. And I think the sooner we start recognizing that and embracing that, other organizations will be there to fight arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder with us.
So, a few items. Number one, I think the bottom line, when it comes to the resistance, particularly when we're building coalitions at the state or we're working one-on-one, we need to be able to prove to the residents that we work with every day that standing strong against Trump means making America stronger. And we have to be able to prove that. But, Ms. Sanders, I think one of the biggest areas that I'm concerned in regards to the resistance, and I'm going to be very critical for a moment, the Democrats really screwed up, and I think we can use the term that President Obama used, shellacked, because we do not have a focus on rural America. And I'm really concerned. If we do not become America's party and not the perceived party of coastal elites and urban centers, we will continue to lose. 86 assemblies, senates, House of Delegates in the states have gone to Republicans. Over 1,000 state legislative seats have been lost. And it's because we are not focusing on those voters who, by the way, those issues that they care about in rural America are not as different as some may perceive in urban America. And I think that if you take a look at the electoral map after this November, it's so red because it was a bloodbath. And here's where I believe. Rather than the Democrats continuing to give lip service to rural Americans, we need to be able to step up, we need to be able to show up, and we need to be able to deliver. And I say that because I'm the only rural Democrat in the California State Senate. And between the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oregon border. And if you take a look at rural America, as along with rural California, the poorest counties in the state of California are rural. 2 of the 5 poorest counties, am I right, in the state are in my district. Highest numbers of homelessness, highest childhood poverty, highest opioid addiction, and Democrats forget that rural voters are our voters too. And they want good schools, they want jobs, they want quality health care, and they want to be able to log on and get onto the internet. And by the way, I have a county that 40% of the households aren't even connected to the internet. What are Democrats doing for rural America? And so what I say, Ms. Sanders, and I apologize that I'm going on the soapbox here for a second.
I like a soapbox.
All right.
We're going to talk about it.
Is this. We need to coordinate. California's homeless bill, $2 billion permanent housing for homelessness. The only way we're going to end homelessness in this country, particularly those who are chronic homeless, is providing individuals with a home wrapped with mental health services as well as drug and alcohol addiction counseling. It was modeled after Utah. Thank you, Utah. When it comes to taxes and holding our president accountable, we were coordinating, thank you so much to 6, with 25 different states across America. Career training, 72% of American public high school graduates will not go on to a 4-year college degree. Democrats should be running with career training and job skills in our classrooms. Am I right? When it comes to dreamers, 800,000 dreamers, Republicans and Democrats alike agree that they need to stay in this country because it's the country that they love and it's the country that they are fighting for every day. So if Democrats and all of us progressives don't get our stuff together, we are going to continue to lose. And Ms. Sanders, I will say, we will win the House, we will win the Senate, we'll take back the presidency, and we'll take back our state houses once we start focusing on rural America.
I see all the rural America people in the crowd.
Seriously.
I see y'all. So let's talk about that, because some people would argue that the problem with the resistance is that it leaves some people out. That's not necessarily my view. I'm just talking about some people. You know, Donald Trump's many people are saying. Some people would say the problem with the resistance is that it leaves some people out, such as rural America, as the state senator just noted. But others would argue that when we talk that, and I'd like the panel to explore this, and so, yes, we have to do more for rural America. Folks in McDowell County, West Virginia are dealing with some of the same stuff as people in, you know, downtown St. Louis. But the problem is, we talk about rural America, oftentimes we're not talking about people that look like me. We're only talking about people that look like you. And so how do we bridge the gap in the conversation? Because the resistance we just established is about doing the work. But how can we bridge the gap in the conversation so that we are actively putting forth an agenda that literally speaks to all people? Because the economy is an everybody issue. But you would think white people only care about the economy. So let's talk about that.
I'm happy to jump in.
Come on, you go, and then I want to hear from Move On, and then I would like to hear from the Assemblywoman, and then I want to hear from NARAL, because I know you have feelings.
Here we go.
I sometimes have feelings.
I think that a successful strategy is not a strategy of one. And I think sometimes we get wrapped up into maybe it's just rural America. Look, I think that's one of our biggest weaknesses. But when you take a look at African American turnout in this past election, it was 10, sometimes 15% less when President Obama ran. And there is a problem with that, and if we're not dealing with that now, then shame on us in 3.5 years. But what I will say is, I'm going to continue to come back to this. The majority of Americans want to keep their health insurance. There's a county on the Oregon border, 26,000 people, one of the most rural in the state of California. Over 8,000 are on the Affordable Care Act, nearly a third of the entire county population. They voted for President Trump. We have to be able to go into that county, communicate with them, take Del Norte County or take a county in Alabama, and be able to show what Democrats are doing to be able to keep their health care. Show what Democrats are doing to be able to provide quality education. Show what we're doing to be able to improve their roads and build middle-class jobs. But I think for us, whether it is in a community of color or a Caucasian community like you have up in Del Norte County, we have to be able to have a multi-pronged strategy to be able to take our state houses back. And I also believe those bridges aren't as long as we think. I think we can bridge some of these divisions that we have by simply bringing a focus for many of us in this room.
Come on, okay, Karine. So
Pandora's box.
Open.
So I guess rural America, do you define that as white people,
No.
rural America? I guess I'm just trying to figure out, because this is a conversation that the Democrats have all the time. Who are we looking at? In rural America, right, there's black people that live in rural America. There are people of color that live in rural America. So I just want to be clear as to who we're talking about, because if you look at and there's a different conversation for state legislators, the country. I mean, really, okay, let me step back. If you look at 2016, Democrats had a lot of issues. It wasn't just rural America, right? It was, like you said, African Americans, black folks, they were not reached out to. We clearly had a problem with women, right? But the reality is white women do vote Republican. I mean, there were some facts, some things that we just didn't address well enough. There is millennials. Millennials went and voted for the third party. So there's a lot of issues that it's hard to look at this and just say it was one thing. There were multiple things that happened that we need to address. And so that's kind of like the thing that's going around in my head. And let's not forget, like, one of the big problems that we're going to have in 2018 and 2020 is Russia. Like, that was a serious thing that happened, and it's not being addressed, and it's not with this administration. So there are a lot of things that happened that we really need to have a serious conversation about, and it's not just rural America. It's like, how do we treat people of color? How do we go out and really reach out to millennials? You know, what is it that there were things that we did that just did not resonate? And that's kind of the angst that I feel when I hear about the primary focus or the conversation being about rural America, because it was across the board.
So, Assemblywoman, I don't think you represent rural America, but in going forward, because we can have a lot of conversations about what happened and what happened, and what folks did wrong or what we missed. But going forward, what is this quote unquote everybody agenda? What does that even look like? Particularly for the states, because I think the states are going to have to lead on this issue, because nationally, I mean, clearly the Democratic Party is having some issues.
Yeah, and look, the other big piece to all of this is the local recruitment and running of candidates who speak to folks. Sorry, I'll say that again. It's the recruitment and the running of state legislators.
So you're gonna have to put it. Yeah, there you go.
Is this better?
Yes.
Should I go into my NPR voice? So the critical piece that's missing here that I think we haven't addressed as a national party and we're not doing effectively at the state level yet is recruiting and running of candidates who will speak to voters, right? You've always heard the story of, well, I hate Congress, but I love my congressperson. I hate the state legislature, but I love my local assemblywoman. And that's really ultimately how we're going to start to see change at the state houses, and we're going to see more people getting engaged and coming out to vote, is if we're picking people who look like their voters. And there is power in that diversity, and there's strength in that diversity, and that's ultimately how, as a party, at the local level, we're really, really going to make a difference.
I'm gonna come back to that point. I'm gonna come back because I like it, but I think there's something we need to also unpack there. Ilyse.
I think there are a lot of different conversations actually wrapped up in this, which is not that surprising because we're still processing a lot of what happened and a lot of how we go forward. I think there is a real conversation to have about how resources get distributed through the Democratic Party. And that conversation needs to be transparent, it needs to be loud, and it needs to be robust. The work of party building is really, really, really difficult, and it is the way that we actually end up, from a nuts and bolts perspective, reaching people regardless of population density, and I think that's a real thing. From a policy perspective, I don't actually think, I'm gonna be controversial. I don't think we're losing because of policy. I don't think we're losing because of some false divide between identity politics and economic populism. I just don't believe it. I believe that people are not actually, I believe we're experiencing a huge crisis in confidence in government, generally. You read polls, came out last week, and it said 78% of people disapprove of the GOP Congress, and you're like, wow, that's a really big number. And then the next line is 68% disapprove of the Democrats. That leads to underperformance, lack of motivation to get to the polls, but I don't actually think this is a policy problem. I think it is a ability to speak about collective values in a language that's tailored to different cultures. And that best comes from the states, that best comes from localities, right? I actually think we're right on with our values. I think most people believe in progressive and democratic values. I don't think we need to cede one whit on values to reach rural voters, to reach urban voters. I think we need to motivate people because they believe that we actually are gonna do something and that we're gonna do something in their interests. And so when we talk about any issue, from jobs or schools or transportation, it always has to be couched in an actual empathetic understanding of where people are coming from, as well as a confidence that I'm gonna fight for you, I get it, right? I'm gonna fight for you. The policies are there. And I'm gonna take, my issues are considered really, really controversial, and sometimes particularly with rural voters, right? The ones who suffer the most are rural voters. Vice President Mike Pence, I don't know if anyone is here from the Indiana delegation, but I don't need to tell you guys, Vice President Mike Pence, in his scorched earth approach to end abortion in his state, when he was governor, closed down reproductive health clinics across the state. First of all, that doesn't actually end abortion, right? What we know is that when abortion is made illegal or inaccessible, the number of abortions don't go down, the number of deaths and injuries to women go up. There are 2 women who have been sent to prison for home abortions in Indiana. 2 women sent to prison. But what did happen? Maternal health outcomes went down in rural Indiana, and HIV rates went up in Indiana. This is about values. This is about who cares for who. And in 2018, drop-off women voters, Symone's organization put out this poll, drop-off women voters, we need to get to the polls in 2018 across this country. Their top 2 issues are health care and abortion rights. And that was priorities language. That was not our language. And the reason for that is particularly women who don't have access to reproductive health care acutely know that is an attack on their families, it is an attack on their dignity, it is an attack on their future because they can't finish school, get jobs, hold jobs, get out of poverty. So for me, we've got to be able to have a collective set of values that we're communicating, and then y'all know how to communicate best with your communities, and that language may differ, that outreach may differ, but it's not giving on values, and we don't have a policy problem.
So that's interesting. So if we don't have a, I think it's interesting for state legislators to hear that we don't have a policy problem when it is literally y'all's job to create policy. So if we're good on the, we're good on the policy. I think, okay, so we're good on the policy, and if we do have the right values, why is it not essentially connecting for Democratic voters and for Democratic constituents? Do we have to rethink the way we are actually engaging in our communities? I'll say this. In 2016, there's a whole swath of Republican voters, conservative Christians, who said they voted for Donald Trump solely because they wanted a conservative Supreme Court justice. Mm-hmm. They got one.
That's right.
And so they ignored the misogyny, they said they didn't like that, they didn't like the sexism, they didn't like the racism, but they wanted this particular thing, and that's why they pulled the lever for Donald Trump. If you ask Democratic voters, in places all across the country, and we're not even talking, we can talk about state legislative races, we can talk about mayoral races. Democratic voters don't necessarily feel that way. And so how do we connect with folks on the values? Do we got to train the people? I mean, because I feel that's the only way the resistance actually becomes effective at home. Because yes, we won on the healthcare fight thus far. We've beat that back, but in over 33 states, more than 90 pieces of legislation have been introduced since 2016 to restrict access to the ballot box. Are we really winning? That's the question for the panel.
I mean, some of this is delivery systems, right? We talked about distribution of resources. We've got to be getting the resources where you all know it needs to go. The way that NARAL thinks about that is we never, ever, ever place organizers in a place that we can't have an impact from the top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket. And y'all help us determine where that is, right? But we're never going to place an organizer in a place that we think we can make a difference in a federal Senate race that we're not making a similar difference in a state house or a state Senate race, because to us, that is the ball game, that is the long pathway back. So I do think that there's a huge conversation to have about how we think about resources, resource allocation. There is no doubt that the other side is way more sophisticated in terms of voter suppression, and that's absolutely true in the way that they have moved legislation through the state houses. My home state of Texas, right? It's just awful. It's awful there, the disenfranchisement that's happening. But it's more than that, all of the work that Cambridge Analytics did that they're talking about in the Trump administration, all of the work of the Russians and the election, blah, 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 which is not blah, 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 Karine's right, it's like a real issue. But a lot of that was actually psychologically knowing how to depress people, right? It wasn't even like, how do I get my voters out? It was like, how do I get you from going? How do I divide you from the folks that are telling you that they actually want to fight for you? How do I diminish the confidence? And, both Symone and Karine mentioned white women have been voting Republican for some time.
Not just have, they have literally been keeping the Republican Party afloat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I think that lets white men off when you say it that way, because white men vote for Republicans in a much higher number than white women. But that doesn't mean white women don't bear responsibility. And I just can't stand the letting the men off of that. But we have taken that seriously, right? Like that is traditionally our base. We have reached into both rural and urban areas of white women. And a lot of that is psychological, which the other side actually gets. I feel like sometimes we're working at 2.0 and they're working at 5.0, right? And so again, it's not a policies thing, it's a values thing, but it's also a psychology thing. It's like actually understanding the human condition and what makes people vote. And I'm not going to tell you we have the answers. I'm going to tell you we have some ideas and hypotheses that we feel like we can test in 2018, and that's what we all have to be doing, is trying new stuff, testing new things, learning from those tests, sharing with each other what we learn from those tests so they can be replicated, and keeping our eye on the long game.
Karine, you want to
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you for the panel today. I have a question about removing barriers within our own party. Often we say we want young people involved, but when you look at the laws for running for office, in many states they're different. Case in point, in our state you need to be 30 to run for lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state. What do you think about, or what's your approach to internal barriers such as age limits or single ticket voting in terms of the parties deciding the candidates on the slate instead of the people in direct primaries?
Excellent question. Who would like to hop on that? So the question is, let me sum it up for y'all. The question is, how can we open up the party really for young people? There are barriers in many states. In Michigan, you have to be 30 basically to run for anything, except state senator and state representative. And so what can we do, one, to open up the party on the state level to younger people, but also I think we need to have some real courageous conversations as Democrats about, we say we want young people at the table, but a lot of times that just means they want to sit at the table. You don't want me to say anything.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
I totally agree. I mean, the state legislators, you guys.
I mean, I'm with you 100%. When I ran
agree.
at 26, people looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, why would you ever want to go work in the state capitol? Or I got, you look so young. Or you look like a teenager. Like, you couldn't possibly be substantive or have the experience to be a state legislator. And now, a couple years in, tables have turned, but ultimately, you can't be what you can't see. And I feel like a lot of the work that I do every single day, day in and day out, is creating this network of other other women of color, other young women who want to run for office, who don't know where to go, who don't have the resources. And recently, we've seen a lot of organizations popping up who will start to turn the tide on some of that work. But oftentimes, I agree with you, it can feel like you're the only one out there doing that work.
Yeah,
Does the Democratic Party need a pipeline program?
They absolutely need a pipeline program. You just came up with the answer, Symone. That's exactly right. No, it's interesting because what you're seeing right now, especially after this election, are a lot of young people who want to get involved, who are looking around them and saying, okay, it's my turn, or I want to step in. And we do have a problem as a party. We do not train our young people. There are people who stay in office for 30, 40 years who have not left, and they're not looking behind them. And there's some people who are, so I don't want to say all of them, but they're not looking behind them to see, okay, who's behind me that I can kind of lift up, elevate, bring into the fold so they can step in when I'm no longer around. And I think that's right. I think the Democratic Party needs a pipeline. We need to actually reach out to people, tell people there's an opportunity here, we need your voice. And it's recruiting and creating a pipeline, so you need both. So young people know that, hey, they can do this as well.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm going to go back to something Nick said in his opening because I think it's really important. I'm on the board with Core Faith and probably other people in the room of a new organization, one of those that has cropped up since the election, called Rise to Run, which is the only organization in the country that focuses on high school and college-age women who want to prepare to run for office. And it's a fabulous organization. There are tons of women supporting it. Some of you are involved in the program. And to the gentleman's question, what we're finding is a lot of those young women are actually focused on structural barriers, and that is part of their training to run. And yes, the Democratic Party can do a lot better, but I think we also need to actually let people and progressive organizations do the work and have the Democratic Party recognize the work rather than just assume the Democratic Party is going to do everything and going to do it perfectly. And I think that is a really, really important pathway forward because,
Okay.
part of this is actually rebuilding confidence. And part of how we rebuild confidence is that when we recognize the valuable work that everyone is doing, whether they are structurally part of the Democratic Party or not. And we've got to end the distrust of advocacy groups and activists in the states of the party. We've got to end the distrust of the party, of outside groups. Both things are real. And part of how we do that is when we recognize each other's work, and this pipeline work and this young people's work is critically important to it. Because when I travel around, I just got back from Minnesota, and I talked to a lot of young students on campus. The last thing they want to do right now, if I start with you should join the Democratic Party, they're not going to listen to another word that I say. But that doesn't mean that we can't actually move them closer to recognizing the Democratic Party as a party of their interests when we also are demanding that the party move closer to recognizing the value they bring to the table.
Senator McGuire, did you want to say something?
I was just about to say exactly what you just did, so I just want to say thank you. And I will share with you, I first was elected to my local school board at 19. And it was a hell of a fight. And did it from the grassroots. And I think that we need to be able to learn from that lesson exactly what you just said. Having individuals who are their age or who look like them, they're able to lead the effort. Because when they lead the effort, those are also our new leaders that are going to be able to organize and change communities for the positive forever. And Ms. Sanders, I'm going to have to jump on a plane.
No, I understand.
And I apologize to get back to California. I just want to say I apologize about leaving early, but due to the fires, I'm going to have to run. Thank you so much for having me.
Y'all give Senator McGuire a round of applause. He was great. We'll take the next question from the crowd as the senator is leaving. Who's got the next question? Are the mics already out there?
I have it right here. Good morning, everyone. I'm State Senator Andrea D'Alessandro from Arizona. Just last week, we're a border community. I have the distinction of being the only gringa in the Latino Legislative Caucus. And last Sunday, I wrote the recommendation letter for Emerge Arizona to a Latina who I hope will succeed me. We have had $2 million in fines that the legislature owns because of Planned Parenthood court cases. You know, and I agree, we have the values, we have the message, but where we failed, I believe, and in Arizona, we did pick up one House seat and one Senate seat, so we're kind of a counter state, but I don't think we adequately connected our values and our issues with the frustration, anxiety, and anger that many of the people in the country are facing.
So how can we better connect our, I mean, this is what we were talking about earlier. How can we better connect the things that we say we're about with the policies that we're actually fighting for to what people are actually dealing with at home? And in a way that helps us win and be effective.
I mean, I heard a little bit of a different question. I heard, what I heard you saying, which I think is totally true in my experience of traveling around the country, is that people are angry, sad, and frustrated. And that if we don't start by acknowledging that anger, fear, and frustration, that we're never going to start from a place of people thinking we recognize what they're going through, right? And this is actually mostly a collective malaise may be too soft a word, that's gripped our country, right? I mean, I keep saying I have children the same age as Karine's, and like, you know, the fear that like our children are gonna have worse lives than we do is very real, and it actually crosses ethnicity, and it crosses party lines right now. And so I think that we have a tendency, which I really value, of framing things in the positive and wanting to look to the future and saying the future is going to be better, and I think that we should continue to do that. But if we don't connect with people and validate their fear and validate their frustration and validate their anger, then they're not going to see us as an ally in moving forward. And I think some of that gets into challenges that we probably don't have time to discuss, right? But like, a lot of that fear and anger and frustration, particularly among Trump voters, was coming from a sense of social dislocation that has to do with the changing demographics in America. And that is a really very, very difficult and real challenge. All of the social data since the election has showed that. And I'm not going to sit up here and say I have the answer. I'm going to say this is the collective challenge for us moving forward without doing what I think the simple and stupid answer is, which is saying we just need to win back white working class voters, right? Because that is not the future of this country. But how do we be inclusive, recognize the fear of social dislocation, and offer solutions that make folks feel like they're not being left behind when that comes from a very deep place within. And then on the other side, we have people who have been left behind for so long and are tired of being left behind, right? This is hopefully what we're all going to be talking about over the next couple days, because that's the real challenge.
I have another question right here. What's your name?
My name is Ramesh Akbari. I'm a state representative from Memphis, Tennessee. So my question for you all is, the resistance looks a lot different in the South. So we often have to toe the line between being able to be effective within our state houses while also speaking out for our constituents. So for the national organizations, what are you all doing to help lift up the South? I mean, we are in super minorities. We are struggling. And I think a lot of times the progressive strategy or the Democratic strategy does not include Southern states. It's almost like we're written off. So these... So for these national organizations, what are you doing, or what are your plans to kind of engage us? Because we're down here, and we're fighting, but we need your help.
Karine?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I think for us, for Move On, we try to be very mindful that we are a national organization, that we do not, that we try to be sensitive to areas like the South. So if there's something going on, we don't come in and hover in and kind of try to fix things. We do strategic partnerships with organizations on the ground. So if there is, we'd love to partner with you and let us know how we can be helpful. That's how we kind of deal with things without looking like I said, we're just coming from up here, 30,000 foot, when when you have to actually be on the ground to understand what's happening. So that is the most important way that we deal with things. If there is, I would love to exchange information after this, and if there are ways that we can be helpful, like we can use our membership, even try to figure out how we can just help you in any way, that's how we do it. We do strategic partnership, we go in, and we let you guys do the work, but we give resources as much as we can and be helpful as much, because maybe the Move On name may not work where you are. And people may be like, nope, that's not who we are. So that's how we try to really be helpful. On the question, can I answer also the question before? I think I agree with Ilyse. People are suffering, and that is so real right now in 2017, especially with vulnerable communities. What we need to do, I believe, in that connection is we have to own the conversation. We have to take it over. And on the other side of the aisle, they do such a great job by taking a lie, something that is so not true, and just banging it in over and over and over and over and again, and they are in such unison that it's almost like the lie becomes true. And we, as Democrats, as progressive, we just have to like make sure that we are just owning the conversation and really knowing how to communicate, because that is one of the biggest problems that I know that I saw when I go back in my head and I look at the last 8 years, the last 10 years. That was always it. Even if you look at ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, those first 4 years, those first 6 years, Republicans owned the conversation. And it was easy for them. They were able to pick 2-3 things, and they controlled it, and they spread lies across the country. And I'm not saying ACA is perfect. That's not what I'm saying. But what they said about it wasn't true. And they sold it as truth. And we just were never able to counter that. I'm just using ACA as an example. But we really have to figure out, how do we communicate, not from DC, but from what's happening in the states. How do people understand what it is that the policies that we're putting forth, how it will help them in a real way, because people are indeed suffering. We have just looking at DACA, I keep thinking about these young people, 800,000 people. We're in 5 months now. They may have to leave this country, probably will. And that's gonna hurt millions of people. not just the 800,000. And so how do we take that message and really just kind of knock it in?
You want to pop in on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I have two answers, and then, well, three answers. The first is good old-fashioned democratic redistribution, right? Like, we make disproportionate amounts of our money from the coastal states, and we try and divert some to the southern states. In some cases, that's actually building state infrastructure. In some cases, it's actually working with partners already on the ground and through those partners. The second is doing the municipal work that we've been able to sort of do in Missouri, and we've done a little bit of that in Tennessee too. We did have a project where we worked with the 5 mayors of the 5 largest cities through the course of 2016 to see what was possible to start the conversation about women and families, which then gives you guys in the state legislature a hold on being able to actually do offensive values work even when you have a really hostile state government, which I know you do. My husband's family is actually from Tullahoma, so yes, exactly. And then the third is listen, which I think Karine was saying, you know, is, and maybe that's the first really, but, you know, staying open and coming to places like this so y'all can just tell us what you need more of and that we can be responsive to that. And I think that that's sort of the way we approach it.
Perfect. Is there a mic out there?
Yes, right here. Right here. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Taylor from the state of Wisconsin. And my question is, when are we going to start having the discussion about building a progressive infrastructure, a machine, just like the right has? I go to the American Legislative Exchange Council meetings, and they've been building this machine for 45 years. We don't even have a way to communicate a message. In a lot of parts of rural Wisconsin, we have no media infrastructure. The Kochs have invested in Americans for Prosperity. They're grassroots organizing in so many communities. Yeah. So we don't even have the network or the structure to communicate the great policies that we're working on and to get a message into some of our communities. So when are we going to start focusing on building that network like the right does have?
That's the question. I'd also like to add, where are we going to get that money like the right has?
That's right.
It's true.
Yeah.
The reason the right has been able to have such an effective messaging strategy and apparatus is because they have a few small wealthy families that bankroll the idea. Yep. And so if we do not have that on the left or people who are willing to step up in the progressive movement to do that, how can we mirror that effort or at least compete?
Great question.
It's $1 million question.
It's many $1 million questions today. That's a great question. I mean, I talked about this earlier. Well, when it came to taking back some of these state houses, a lot of these state houses, the Republicans raised tens of millions of dollars to do that, and they did it. They did it really effectively. Look, I can only speak to what Move On is doing right now. Like I mentioned this earlier, like we thought about that. We thought about what can we do now to really start and build something with members that we have across the country and train them and give them the resources to have those conversations and to talk to people about these different issues. And that's what we did this summer with our Move On mobilizers, and we had over 1,000 people across the country. That's not enough, that's just a beginning, but it starts a process. And we wanted to see how successful can we be? Where can we take this? And that's why we tried this experiment, and it did really well, and now we're going to continue to build so that we're building in these states, we're training our folks, we're giving them resources, and we're having the real conversation, because they were doing these neighborhood talks, and they were hearing from people about why they liked ACA, why they didn't like ACA, what was important to them, what did they want to see. And so that is one, I think, one way to go about it, but it is a larger question that we have to continue to try to figure out and answer.
In no way do I want to diminish the challenge of resources in getting these messages out to all corners of all states in this country. We're not going to compete on money. And we have phenomenal examples of where the person with the most money does not win. actually loses. Where we are going to compete, and this also takes money, but it just isn't the same model or same amount of money. They need money because they don't have people. They need money because they don't have people. We've got people. And when we spend our resources on actually making sure all of those people can participate, want to participate, and have the capacity to participate, that's when we win. And so I don't want to diminish the need for more resources to make that happen, but I used to work in campaign finance reform, and it's not that it's not important, because it's extremely, extremely important to be able to compete, but like, I'm going to take the people over the money any day and put my bets there.
All right. I think we have a question over there. Who has the mic on this side?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, panel, so much. Johnny Shaw from Tennessee. I'd like for you all to, if you would, talk a little bit more about fear, because that's what the Republican Party is doing. They are promoting fear. They've been doing it, and I heard this over the last 7 or 8 years or even longer. And you know, people will buy whatever you're selling. In America, I live in a rural area, and I hear this every day. People say, well, you know, I just couldn't vote for Hillary, so I voted for Trump. Now, if you think about it for a moment, how do you choose one crook over another crook? And then when you look at, with no offense to anyone in this room, no offense at all, but when you look at Washington, it's made up of a lot of old white men. And they are thinking for everybody in America because they are promoting fear. Every day they tell someone else another lie. Fake news, divergent. They move from one point to another to keep people wondering what's going to happen to next day. So I wish you all would discuss some strategies to how we overcome that. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Shaw. Well, panel, what you got? How do we overcome it?
I mean, the level of bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism that is out there is astounding. I know that I face it not just, you know, going through Twitter, but through hate mail sent to offices, through the rhetoric that we're seeing from people who, have been just influenced by fear. And to go back to, I think, Ilyse's point earlier, it's you need to ultimately give them something else to believe in, to focus on, and to organize around. We haven't done that effectively over the course of many years, and I think today is step one in that process, but that work to beat back the racism, the bigotry, and all the awful rhetoric we're seeing will take some time.
Yeah, oh, I don't know where Symone went. Where's Symone went? Okay, I'm gonna go for it. Donald Trump has tapped into the worst parts of this country. And it's that fear, it's that all of the horrible isms that we hear about and that we have to face every day. But the thing that I like to at least give myself some hope is that that's only 35%. While it is significant, but it's 35% of his supporters who will probably never ever leave him, who truly believe everything that he says. So that means there's a big chunk of this country, I like to hope and think, that do not believe in this guy and are hopefully don't believe in all those awful isms. So I'd like to think while the country's divided, there's still more of us than there is of him and his people. And so what we need to do is we need to continue to just, again, we have to keep communicating and have to have a message that hits home.
I mean, I think it is starting with the local and working our way up. You gave the example of Hillary and Donald Trump, and we could talk forever about the 2016 election at the presidential level. But I mean, you know, if we take a page out of the other side we know that actually as confidence has collapsed in the federal government and fear has become an effective tool for the Republicans, the best place to start to mend those relationships is at the local and state level, where y'all are actually there every day talking to the people whose lives you're affecting. And I think that matters very, very much. It sort of goes back to one of the first questions, the wonderful woman from Oregon, which is breaking down the artificial barriers among our constituents. One of the first things that I felt was really important to do when I came into NARAL in 2013 was make sure that the organization adopted a position on immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, and a pathway to citizenship, because being able to stay together as families is very much a reproductive justice issue, right? Voter suppression is very much a dignity and empowerment issue, and it matters for women and families and having the policies that matter. So at the community level, if we break down these barriers, if we are able to say that we can bring NARAL members and Move On members and y'all together in the same room along with our friends at Color and New Mexico and Colorado and Young Women United, and start to actually knit that community together and invest that faith in y'all as local and state legislators, I really do think we're going to see the national impact of that.
And I'd also like to add, we need to call out racism and bigotry every single time we see it. I think we have a question right over here, and don't be shy about it either.
Good morning. I am State Representative Park Cannon. I was elected to the Georgia House at age 24.
She's also a millennial. Shout out to the millennials. I like to call them the millennials.
Many young people want to know what each state Democratic Party's strategy is on impeachment, because this is a timely way to get young people involved in the political pipeline and sooner. So, how do you think states can support our Congresspeople on impeaching Donald Trump?
Well, the millennials did not come to play this morning.
Not today.
Where is
Thank you, Park.
vaccines? Water.
So, y'all, we can need to answer that question. I think another question to pose is, are our Congress people even in the mindset of impeachment? Just turn my mic off, I'm gonna turn it up.
I hope so.
That sounds like gay now.
Well, I mean, to set it up, yes, there are young people across this country, younger voters, to be frank, some of whom did not vote, are also like, what can we do? Like, we need to get Donald Trump out of office. Why are our Congress folks not talking about impeachment? What are our state Democratic parties and state elected officials doing about impeachment? But there's also another conversation to be had about the fact that there are some people that do not want to use the I word.
Yeah, no, that's
That don't want to go anywhere near impeachment at all. And so we can't talk about, one could argue, we can't talk about a strategy for impeachment if the folks who are in charge of impeachment aren't even getting there. And the other part is, there will be no impeachment if we don't win the House in 2018.
Right, that's
so
exactly
answer
right.
some of these questions.
Look, I think if, this is why 2018 is so important. Like, if Republicans certainly are not going to be impeaching Donald Trump anytime soon, and they have the power to do that on both sides, on the House side and really the Senate side is where that would actually happen. And so they are clearly in lockstep with Donald Trump and all his awful bigotry and everything else. So that's not going to happen. On the Democratic side, if you ask Maxine Waters, our wonderful congresswoman, she is talking about it every moment, every second that she can, and I applaud her for it, and I think she's absolutely 110% right. Move On has called for it. Our members are in lockstep with it, millions of members, and I cannot really answer as to why there are leaders in our Democratic Party who the I word they run away from. I'm not really sure why that is, but there couldn't be any clearer list of things as to why he should be impeached. There really couldn't, from Russia to just him as a president.